Hello and welcome to another Infinity Battle Report. Today we have a game of Tohaa versus Bakunin, and for those who've watched the previous video on this channel, you will probably recognize this as a rematch. A number of things went into the making of today's game, including on my end, a comment from viewer Sinan Atama, and apologies if that was mispronounced. Sinan asked for a game or report about the use of peripherals in Infinity. Now, in particular, he asked about the use of the Strelok and K9 Antipode, which won't be featured obviously in this battle report, but it was a really interesting question about how to use peripherals effectively, and so for my part, I've tried to add in some interesting peripheral choices in this army list. My opponent has done likewise, although in his case that was not motivated by a response to YouTube comment, but rather by the loss he received in the last game and reaching for Uberfull Commando as an excellent anti-Tohaa tool. So this game was actually fought some days ago, and I'll mostly be touching on the high points of the game, but what we will be talking about is the use of peripherals in Infinity and how to handle different types of peripheral teams effectively and their use cases. So with that said, let's start by looking at the lists. So this was the list that I played for the game. It's built around a fairly core Tohaa shell, so you'll recognize there are the usual 3 high-quality Tohaa irregular troops there in the presence of the Liberto, the Delegate, and now the Authorized Bounty Hunter, Motorized Bounty Hunter, which has become a reasonably cheap 8-point staple in my lists. It's filled out by some Chaxas and some Kael'tars, in this case only one McCall. You would be well within your rights to have the second of the 2 fire teams up there include a McCall as well, but I had 1 spare point, so I upgraded to a Kamel Paramedic because we would be playing Frontline in this game, and Frontline is, these days, a surprisingly classified heavy scenario. I wanted just a little bit more in the way of options. There are 2 tack whales, including the tack whale lieutenant with +1 order and combi rifle, which I continue to love as a group 2 piece, and a tack whale with Spitfire and chain of command leading a triad in the first combat group. There's also a Sukhoi K1 sniper. That fire team with the Sukhoi, the Kael'tar, and the Kamel is almost purely fire support / actual support, thanks to the paramedic. I wouldn't necessarily be banking on it to do anything great, but it is quite cheap and maybe it will be able to take a gunfight. We also have Jan Star in this list, which one is kind of a classic Tohaa piece, and so in the matchup of Bakunin built to counter Tohaa versus Tohaa, it felt reasonable to include. But also I wanted to get some more games in with it because, as I mentioned, he kind of consistently fails me, and I feel like that is consistently user error. The peripherals in this list are present in the form of the 2 Chaxet peripherals attached to a pair of Rassails. Now, to note, if you wanted to try this list out and have a wider variety of peripherals to play with, you could just straight swap one of that Rassail team's set up for a Preceptor with 2 SymbioBeasts, and that would be very serviceable. But I've used them in the past, and I find them slightly awkward in N4. They're a hybrid melee unit without stealth. They have some real utility, and for their cost, they're still quite good. But I wanted to try a theory with the Rassails. So these are the cheapest Rassail profiles. They have light shotguns and +1 burst contenders, and you can absolutely upgrade that Rassail to a viral combi rifle for a mere 3 points, which is prima facie a really good deal. Now, 3 points is 3 points, and there's not a lot to cut in this list. To afford those, that Sukhoi or K1 sniper would have to come down to a much cheaper gun, like a, say, Spitfire Sakiel. But it could reasonably be done. The theory I wanted to test here, though, is that the light shotgun and contender is actually probably a really good weapon loadout for the Rassail, and in particular, it allows the Rassails to be deployed defensively kind of just fine. The viral combi Rassail really has to be used to attack, because the viral combi on the defense is really not significantly different from a contender. It's not a template weapon. It can go into suppressive fire, but it can't be coordinated into suppressive fire. It requires some setup. You need to waste an order on that. So it's kind of a non-ideal defensive piece. On the other hand, a Rassail with a contender at 8 to 16 is no different to a viral combi in ARO. And the light shotgun means it has a template weapon in ARO, which can be really, really useful, especially on a troop that has 3 wounds. And on the attack, if my opponent chooses to let me template them by not dodging, same reason, right? A viral combi is always making some kind of a face-to-face roll. Viral combi is a really good weapon, even on BS12. But on a 3 wound troop, a template seems like a really good idea. So we're going to try this. It's not necessarily the most points efficient profile, but it's reasonably lean. And 32 points for 4 wounds is a pretty good gig. So part of the purpose of this list is to give those Rassails a strut both on offense and defense and see how they work. This here is my best approximation of my opponent's Bakunin list. I may have the groups slightly wrong, and in particular, I might have the Riot Girl Tinbot incorrect. You could downgrade that Riot Girl to a regular boarding shotgun or another combi Blitzen or something to that effect in order to fit another Pupnik, and he did deploy with 3 Pupniks on both Chimeras. So there might just be only the Tinbot on the Taskmaster. Now, this is built as an anti-Tohaa list, but the Taskmaster is also a bit of an experimental piece. If you wanted to play this at home, as it were, you could 100% take the Taskmaster and just turn it into a Spitfire Riot Girl, and that would be really, really good. In this game, the Taskmaster's armor would 100% matter. The Koalas would also be quite useful, but it's a significant cost upgrade, and there is the SWC, right, to exchange the Red Fury Taskmaster for a Spitfire Riot Girl. The fact that it's 1 SWC is no advantage here particularly. So that's an experimental piece. It was fine, as Taskmasters usually are. A Riot Girl would have been almost as good at a much cheaper cost. Otherwise, you have that big heavy Riot Girl core link, right? So Missile Launcher, Specialist with Combi Rifle and Blitzen. Maybe that wasn't a Specialist, and that's what he afforded the extra Pupnik. Anyway, Boarding Shotgun with Tinbot, Big Firewall, and then Avicenna rounding out the team. 2 moderators. In this game, one of them was a lieutenant, but the Taskmaster can also be a lieutenant if that's your jam. It's the same whip, so the moderators still act as pseudo decoys, and it can potentially be useful in some games to make your heavy piece into a lieutenant. But if you want it to gunfight and there's not a reason to make it the lieutenant, you're running a bit of a risk there. A Zero Mine Layer, kind of just because there were points, and because it helps sort of fend off things like Libertos and Bikers. 2 Transductor Zones, a Reverend Moira with Heavy Machine Gun. This is a piece I love in Bakunin. It's also not bad in Vanilla Nomads, although a bit expensive. And the NCO on Moira's really comes into their own here. So she's only BS12, but she's Mimetism -6 with decent armor, hanging out near a very good doctor. She fills the role of like a fire support piece in a second combat group, almost in the way that you can use a tag for, but much, much, much cheaper. She's nearly 40 points cheaper than a Lizard would be. Now, she's almost as good a gunfighter thanks to the Mimetism, even though her ballistic skill is lower. She doesn't pack AP rounds, but she's obviously way, way, way more fragile, even with armor 3. But you can still just do really useful things with a big gun in combat group 2. The second Chimera is here, and those Chimera round out basically why this is an anti-Tohaa list. So not only do the Chimera add really good ablative defense, like this ring of Pupniks that can help stop penetrations into your deployment zone and waste opponents' time. They're also very good at discovering, because their whip is low, but there are lots of them. And they are functionally hard immune to the tack wheel bullshit that I pulled off in the last game. So if you remember that battle report, there are kind of 2 things that tack wheels do in ARO. The first is that they drop endgame and kill models with wounds. And the second is that they can cover themselves or nearby troops with smoke to make them immune to being shot. With Eclipse, no less. Both of those are no obstacle to the Chimera, because the Chimera herself has structure rather than wounds, so she is immune to endgame. And the Pupniks can be endgamed, but they are 1-point models, and if you cover yourself with smoke while there is a Chimera around, you are dead. Nothing in Tohaa can outfight those pieces in close combat. A McCall is a really, really good CC fighter, but it can be handily killed by just running 2 Pupniks into CC. Which is probably a reasonably good segue into kind of a short piece around the general philosophy of using peripherals. So, Sinai, this is kind of an answer to your question before we get into some worked examples in the game. So when you're thinking about peripherals, the first thing to do is actually break them down into 2 broad ways to use them. The first way to use them is the way that the Strelok and K9 Antipode kind of work best as. And that is where you treat the team actually with the synchronized model, the peripheral, as an attack, utility, or defense piece, while the controller kind of just hides a little bit. And the idea there is that the peripheral is the element that you use and sacrifice and run through mines and just do things that are useful to you and annoying to your opponent. And all you lose when they die is the points that you paid for them. You don't lose a trooper, you don't lose an order. You aren't really significantly disadvantaged. So for a Strelok, for example, what is a good way to use the Strelok with the K9 Antipode? It's to use the Antipode's sensor. If you want to use them actively, you move it up into the midfield, and you try and sort of, you discover enemy camouflage markers, you work as a kind of like counter-infiltrator piece, or defensively threatening a trench hammer to the face if your opponent doesn't stop and discover the Antipode before they continue to move. An Antipode is a very rare peripheral in that it has mimetism and camouflage, just like its controller. Obviously, it is identified by the fact that it's under a Silhouette 3 base. But that's kind of how you use those pieces. Often you actually won't necessarily attack a great deal with them, and the reason why is that the Strelok herself is not a particularly good attacker. She's very vulnerable. She doesn't have high armor, she doesn't have high ballistic skill, she does have surprise and mimetism, so she can sometimes swing a good sort of modifier in a face-to-face roll, but she's only got one wound, and she's a clear target, right? So the weakness of peripheral teams is that killing one of the models in the team destroys both of them, or ends both of them. And that's the case. If you kill the Strelok herself, then the Antipode is no longer a threat, it goes inert. Same deal with Peacemakers, same deal with serious teams. So these teams will usually want to attack first or defend first with the peripheral, and then only second roll in or defend with the actual controller. So if we think about serious teams, for example, the serious bot is often positioned further forward where its repeater and its glue gun template can be of most use, and the controller itself kind of hangs back because she's not really for fighting. You can have a hacker serious, which is totally great. That's probably my favorite profile. But for example, upgunned serious trooper profiles I don't particularly like because it's a reasonably easy face-to-face roll decision. You kill the controller. With the Peacemaker and the Oxbot, that is collectively a cheap enough team that you kind of can roll in with everything if you want. But say there are template weapons on defense, they will always target the Peacemaker itself. But the Oxbot is dangerous and annoying and cheap. With a Peacemaker and an Oxbot, you start far up the field. They are absolutely good as aggressive pieces, where the Oxbot runs in first, it detonates any mines, sometimes it dodges, sometimes it survives, usually it will die because its fizz is terrible and it has no armor, but that will clear the way for the Peacemaker to then roll in with its shotgun attack and absolutely make a mess of things. And sometimes the Oxbot survives, and it can attack first, and it can push deep, and then the Peacemaker can follow up. And sometimes you even have a situation where the Oxbot gets some kills before it dies, and actually you can just leave the Peacemaker somewhere that it's really annoying to kill, because it still has that shotgun and ARO, and it is still a repeater. So for those kind of teams, where the controller of the peripherals is vulnerable, or not like an amazing fighter, you want to basically treat the peripheral as a disposable or useful piece. So in the case of the Strelok, use the Strelok to clear mines, discover things, and be annoying to your opponent. Probably don't want to attack with the team unless you have a really clear opening. But sometimes you do, and you'll want to take advantage of that. Distinct from that is using peripherals where you actually use everything all at once, ideally against the same targets, concentrating force, and presenting multiple threats in the same order that can't all be responded to. So a classic example, or not classic, quite new and very powerful example, would be Fiddler in Nomads. Fiddler herself is reasonably tough, right? And that's important. And the reason why you will usually see this technique employed by controllers that have like at least pseudo multiple wounds is that, for the reason I mentioned, right? That if you kill the controller, you basically destroy the team, so the controller is often a natural target for AROs. Fiddler is kind of tough enough to survive some face-to-face rolls, and her jackbots are really, really dangerous. Her jackbots can lay down between the two of them 4 fire templates or 4 armor-piercing slugs, and it is impossible to face-to-face roll all of that. The Rassail works kind of similarly. A Rassail is a good enough gunfighter, and it's really tough. It has 3 wounds and a nano screen. So it is frustratingly difficult to kill a Rassail, and the took me a second. The Chaksa has a heavy flamethrower and also mimetism. So the Chaksa is really dangerous if you let it let the flamethrower go unopposed by a dodge. But if you dodge, then the Chaksa will probably still flamethrower you. It might even pistol you. And the Rasail has a great face-to-face roll where no one's under any threat, and it can either contender or viral combi or shotgun you, and all you're doing is dodging. So the combined attack is almost like an active turn fork, and is really powerful. Now, with Tohaa, you also have SymbioBeasts, who can kind of do the same thing, but I have found them just a little bit awkward because the team occupies a great deal of physical space thanks to the Silhouette 3 SymbioBeasts. And for the cost, the 32 points, the leader of the team is actually only so tough, but he does have 2 wounds, so you can use them in a very similar way. It's just that Pulsar templates kind of don't have the same threat as a heavy flamethrower, and a BS-11 submachine gun doesn't have the same threat. The SymbioBeast team occupies this space where it can melee and it can shoot, but it isn't necessarily great at both, but it is fantastic defensively. So I almost use the SymbioBeast team the same way I describe using the Strelok and similar pieces, where the SymbioBeasts are just defensive. They dodge great, and they're dogged, and they're good in melee, and they've got a template weapon. So you almost are willing to pay the cost of the Preceptor just to take the SymbioBeasts on defense. And I kind of regret that the Preceptor picked up Super Jump this edition, because that increased his cost. And if he was cheaper, they'd be better on that defensive role. But anyway, Uberfell Commando are an interesting thing where the Chimera herself doesn't really fit into that. This piece is tough. So you have to straddle the line a little bit, because she is intensely dangerous, but she's very vulnerable to literally any hit. She has total immunity, so she'll ignore flash pulses. But otherwise, a combi rifle hit, it kills her often, more often than not. You really want to straddle the line between using her, getting her into melee, or just using the chimeras, the actual pupniks, and getting them into melee. And you can take advantage of the fact that she has those 3 peripherals by sometimes just running all of the chimera into CC first. That'll often be the best thing to do. And then forking your opponent's ARO that way. So when you have multiple models in a close combat and they are all activating and you declare CC attack, you choose which one of them makes the attack and it gets all of the burst, which creates functionally a forked ARO situation if you want it, because your opponent will have to respond to ARO against one of those pupniks. And then you can just have that pupnik not make the face-to-face roll. You can have another pupnik of the 3 of them attack, and then you'll effectively get, most of the time, you'll get 3 hits with the ACCWs, and your opponent can't kill all of the pupniks unless somehow it's sort of like it's templated them on the way in and you haven't dodged, in which case you should, because they're dodge amazing. And so that then clears the way for the Chimera herself to safely move into CC. And we'll see some of that in this game here. So that's a brief kind of like primer on general ways of using peripheral teams. Let's actually jump into the game and see some of these in practice. So this is the table from my deployment zone. I have lost the role. My opponent has picked the deployment side that he is on. This is Frontline, so there is end of game scoring advantage, and he intends to leverage that. And so I've decided to go first. I mean, I could YOLO this and go second, deploy first, but I'm not quite game to do that, particularly not since I know that he is running some Uberfell Commando. And in any case, I have Janstar, so I'm reasonably well set up to make an attack, or at least I should be. There are more proxies than usual, by the way, since I don't own everything that I need based as I want yet for this, but we'll work through it. So you can't quite see it on this picture, but up here is actually a quite accessible spot for a sniper or riot girl missile. And so I am kind of expecting that that is where his core link team will go. I don't know what he has at this point, other than that he has been talking a game about Uberfell Commando. There could be a Lizard in the works. There could be a light riot girl team with just the missile launcher and moderators. But I'm kind of accounting for the fact that there'll be a missile launcher standing somewhere up here. So my deployment deals with this, basically. There is the Sukhoi sniper hanging out down here, but various pieces in between it and the missile launcher will stop it from being seen by that tower, while still giving it a line down here and across here. It's not perfect, but I don't want to have to move it to get it out of trouble. And I don't want it to have to fight a missile launcher, particularly since I'm not giving it a SymbioMate. So that's a very bad face-to-face roll. If I lose the fight, I'm dead. It's hanging out with the Kamale Infantry Paramedic, and there's a Kael'tar down here, or there will be soon, and I'm reserving 2 troops because I'm doing the Janstar thing. Otherwise, we've kind of built a big starting line here. You can see that a little bit better in this photograph. So one of the Rassails is here, set up defensively, so the flamethrower Chaksa can sort of see around there, and then the Rassail itself is sort of nooked in a little bit more, but still has sort of kind of similar lines of fire. If I never move them, they're in a defensive position to kind of hold this part of the table against close incursion. I've also got a Symbio Bomb on the Rassail, which I think is totally fine. A Libertos is hanging out prone on this bridge with its mine. Its mine is very aggressive and obviously postured, but I just want to, again, I want to be able to stop Uberfell commanders, or at least slow them up slightly. So the mine's got a detonation radius kind of a fair bit of the table, and it's right on the edge of that high ground so that it can detonate down. This is a biker, don't have a Tohaa biker yet. And then around here, also nooked in, I have another Rassail, and then it's Chaksa. Now I'm deploying the Chaksas behind the Rassails, even though the Rassails are the controller, because one, the Rassails have 3 wounds, otherwise you would, if you were using this like a Strelok, you would always have that antipode further forward. But 2, if I go on the attack, Rassails are 4-4 and Chaksas are 6-4. So if I have the Rassails further forward, then the Chaksas will still overtake them in a couple of orders. The delegate is here, and then we have 2 Takwheel officers and the team that will eventually become the Takwheel Chain of Commands team. So this is a very sort of Ferroware heavy area, and it's extending its influence kind of down these 2 channels that can approach up the board. But the main thing is, if I need to, I can advance into this building, project threat out those directions, and have this lovely blocker in between me and where I think the missile launcher is going to go. Now, if my opponent scuppers me and the missile launcher ends up somewhere else, there are only so many good places. I'm probably still fine, you know, there's smoke and eclipse, etc. And we're playing these as muddy windows, which is a model that is in contact with a window can see and be seen. A model that is not in contact with a window can't, although the doors themselves, and there's one there, are open. So I've also reserved Janstar and a Kael'tar, and we'll get to that shortly. This is a side view of the table, and for my opponent's part, he's deployed kind of conservatively, but there's a moderator hanging out back here and a moderator hanging out way back here, and then there's some flash pulse bots. The first Uberfall Commando has deployed down here, and then the bulk of the rest of his deployment is in a Fort Kickass. And here's a view of the Riot Gold team, kind of to show you what I mean. This is just a Salyut Zond. It is a repeater, but I can't see any hackers, although there are 2 camouflage markers which could telegraph a 0 and a mine, or the way they're positioned, they're almost certainly a 0 and a mine layer, but they could have a hacker under camouflage. This is kind of an example of why I have real trouble attacking my opponents with Janstar aggressively. There are layers of defense here that do a really good job in defeating many of the usual tools that Janstar has. So Janstar, if you think about what he's good at, he is great at demolishing like light infantry links with 1 big gun. So the classic 4 Fusiliers and 1 Kamau, 4 Fusiliers and 1 Orc as fuel for the rest of the list. Janstar is really good against that. We don't see a lot of that locally. A little bit, but it's kind of rare. You think about like who are good players in my local meta, playing vanilla, playing non-sectoral armies, playing Bakunin, which can run a really heavy link team, playing Spiral Core, which doesn't play that way at all. There are multiple good vanilla combined players. There are multiple good vanilla Yuching players. So that kind of like single big vulnerable target is just rare. You'll see it occasionally, but it's not super common. Instead, we have something like this. And this is an example of a layered defense. So to start with, the team is mostly mutually supporting. You'll see here, Avicenna is prone, and so potentially something could drop down there. But there are pieces in that direction that would be able to offer some overwatch in this particular case. Avicenna is probably the most vulnerable piece, but The entire team is protected by a very powerful tin bot. The entire team is exceptional at dodging. Literally, the entire team has, at best, a 1 in 4 chance of dying to a pair of shotgun templates, which means that they can respond aggressively in face-to-face rolls and are not threatened by Janstar's shotgun immediately. There's a really good doctor. They're also really good at dodging. There's a crazy koala back here, which is extending its zone of control, something like that. So most pieces, if I run into close combat with him, I'll trigger a koala for my trouble. And then there is an entire Uberfell commando team here, like ready to make discover rolls or respond to something pushing into the deployment zone. And there are also multiple flash pulses watching this approach. Now, we look at my opponent's deployment zone otherwise. I give somewhat strong consideration to reserve dropping Janstar down here. Now, if I do that, all I am doing, I have to go prone to avoid the Riot Girl missile launcher. All I am doing is committing to killing one moderator and one Fugazi kind of efficiently as possible. I end up not doing that because Janstar is whip 13, and I've spent a command token and Jan to pull off SymbioMate, SymbioBomb, Impersonator. Rolling a whip 13 is, I would try that for a Greif. I would potentially even try it for Jan if I wasn't attempting to reserve him with a Kael'tar specialist. But and you can always just, you roll for Jan first, then you deploy the Kael'tar if Jan has failed his role, you just give out mates and bombs to other things. But a whip 13 Impersonator feels to me like it's going to fail more often than I'm comfortable with. And this list that I'm facing is good. And I haven't even seen my opponent's reserve yet. If I drop Jan down there and there's a second Chimera as the reserve, then he potentially gets pinned in and put in real trouble and dies for his trouble. So I go with the more conservative play of deploying him in this building here. And all I'm looking to do there is get a kill on this moderator and maybe this Transductor Zond and be happy with that. I accept that there is functionally no way for him to push into and attack this team. It's just outside his weight class by an order of magnitude. And that's just kind of an example of what I mean when I say I don't particularly like Janstar locally. He just does not do the trick for me. If this was a team of 1 Orc and 4 Fusiliers, I would go up the guts. I would probably deploy him kind of similar to where I had, maybe say here, and I would re-impersonate as the first short skill, move, and then go up the guts with the shotgun and the mate and all of the tools that he has. But all of the tools that he has just don't do shit against this team, except if I'm willing to hard roll into Abyssiana and, just maybe take that kill. Maybe take that kill or maybe not. I can't realistically use the SymbioBomb against the team because they have a massive great firewall. I'd be rolling on 7s. It's just a very, very good defense. So Jan comes down here and he is counter-deployed by an Uberfell Commando team. Now, my opponent, I think, makes a slight mistake here, and this is because we're playing a little bit quick at this point. He puts the Uberfell Commando behind the window with the moderator. Now, he should not have done that. He should have had the Uberfell Commando probably on the rooftop and just use the Pupniks as interdiction to Jan. The mistake that he has made by putting the Uberfell Commando down near the moderator is that I'm able to start my turn and Jan literally moves to the window. And although there are all of these Pupniks around here that under normal circumstances would be threatening to dodge in and engage me, I'm able to just draw line of fire directly to the Uberfell Commando. So she has to declare dodge, and the moderator kind of also declares dodge, and I just viral combied a lot of them. Viral pistoled a lot of them. And even though that's just a damage 12 weapon against the Uberfell Commando, it takes 2 orders, might even take 3 between everything, but I just put them down. And I'm moving in a way that I'm not going to get stuck in melee with a Pupnik, although if it came to it, Jan is kind of good enough to maybe beat a Pupnik in melee some of the time. So my first turn really mostly just consists of Jan killing these things, and then moving around to here. And I have the choice here, I've still got my SymbioMate after all of this, but I choose to take a Flash Pulse, delete the SymbioMate, and kill this Transductor Zond, and then just pull back to safety and leave a mine behind me. A mine drops down there. I could have not engaged that Transductor Zond, because then the SymbioMate would still be intact on Jan, but I had the orders. It felt like a reasonable thing to do. And ultimately, if we look at how the next turn plays out, the SymbioMate would have cost my opponent 1 extra order, and I killed 1 order with the Transductors on. So kind of a net trade. That's about all I can do for this turn. There is some staging, some moving up, some things sort of like just occupy positions, and you kind of need to do that in Frontline. My lieutenant drops some smoke down so the biker can get to here and go into suppressive fire, again staying away from the missile launcher. But we really just occupy space. The Rassel will move up a little bit, etc. We are now somewhat at the mercy of my opponent's counterattack, although our defenses are reasonably good. Counterattacking with my opponent with the Riot Girls is going to be pretty tricky because they do have a little bit of an awkward sort of decamp, leaving that the only way down off of this fortress here is to go backwards with the missile launcher, although other pieces could move up reasonably aggressively. But what my opponent decides to do is the main thing he wants to accomplish as his first turn is to kill Jan. And so this is where we're going to see sort of the first use of peripherals. So I'll just zoom in a little bit to make this case a little bit easier. Now we'll recall that up in this direction, there was the second Uberfall team, and they go for it basically. They come down here. They've got climbing plus. They move down off of the high ground, and the Chimera sort of moves up to here. Now, basically to be order efficient, the one Pupnik is sent in as a suicide to clean up the mine, so that the Chimera can, in the same order, drop smoke down there, which she does. If my opponent had wanted to basically delay a whole order, which I would have been fairly happy with, they could first have moved in with a Chimera and dodged. But so with the Pupnik and dodged, the Pupnik is 1 point and he still has 2 left. So, and even if he had, I mean, it's an extra order. It would have been the slightly safer, longer term play, but there's a lot that can potentially get done this turn. I'm just hoping that Jan delays long enough. So I think it is reasonable to, it's 1 point. It's 1 point and it has a chance to pass the save anyway. So the Chimera gets smoked down here, and the Pupnik takes 1 for the team, and it does in fact die. The team then continues to move in as Jan, like, basically hugs this wall, trying to put more than a base size between him and the smoke, which he does. So this is where we get to the first sort of the use of peripherals in close combat, and that is the ARO fork. Now, to pause very briefly, there is a rules interaction here that can be used abusively, but which we are not playing in my local area. And that is post FAQ 1.1.1. If you're watching this video in the future, this may have been addressed. You can declare CC attack as your first short skill, and then your opponent can ARO. And you can ARO with a ballistic skill attack. You can ARO with a template weapon. If you ARO with a template weapon, what the Uberfell Commando team can do is they can have everything but the model that you have chosen as the primary target leave the smoke or leave cover and move into CC with you. And the model that you have chosen as the primary target for your template weapon never enter your line of fire. This makes the template weapon ARO illegal at the requirement stage, and so it will fizzle, and then they will just fucking murder you. There are a number of other interactions in 1.1.1 as well that are they read as sufficiently unintended that we have rules in place for events locally that are just, here's how we're playing this in the interim. And one of them is you follow all of the order declaration and resolution rules laid out in FAQ 1.1.1. A point on which the rules are silent and how we choose to play it is skills can be declared in any order, but they cannot be declared from locations that are speculative. If you are not in close combat, you can't declare CC attack against something. If you have not yet entered line of fire of an opponent, you can't declare BS attack against them because you have not yet had a point in your order that you can say, from this point I am shooting. Actually, because when you declare, say, ballistic skill attack, you declare the position that you are attacking from and how you're using your weapon. Those details have to be set on declaration. What we are saying is you can't declare a speculative location for a ballistic skill attack or for a CC attack or for any other skill. So hypothetically, you would not be able to declare First short skill, press button. Second short skill, move into the button. Move onto the button. So the Chimera in this case, if you're playing without those rules, could declare CC attack. Just the whole team declares it. And then whoever Jan Star chooses to ARO against just stays in the smoke. And literally everyone else runs into CC and nuts him. That's option 1. Option 2 is, and if he wasn't a model with a template weapon, probably what you would do, is you would run most likely all the 2 remaining Pupniks into close combat, and while setting up the Uberfell Commando to move in the next order. And whichever Pupnik he AROs against, the other Pupnik makes a CC attack. If he lays down the shotgun, then you dodge with everything, because the Pupniks dodge on 19s. Now, what actually happens in this particular case is my opponent has moved forward just slightly too aggressively to a point where the Pupniks, if they move, basically the way the positioning has worked and how Janstar's dodges have gone, is it's not easy for my opponent to only expose the Pupniks in the first instance to a shotgun attack. So what he does is he just yeets out of the smoke. I lay down the shotgun and he dodges with everything, and everything succeeds its dodge. So what's that succeed? That might have killed the Chimera, but what actually happens is it has wasted my opponent an order, and so then she just activates again. And in this case, she is very comfortable being the one making an attack. I kill a Pupnik in close. I just ARO against a Pupnik. I kill the Pupnik. She kills me. Oh, so I kill a Pupnik. She strips a Symbiomate from Jan, because he's still carrying it at that point. No, he's lost it at that point. Sorry. He is BTS 6, so he survives because she's got a viral CCW. He survives basically with some good luck the first round of attacks, and then he's put down like a dog with the second. After all of this, I've managed to basically kill everything except the Uberfell Commando, who is standing over Jan's corpse, but she's put him down. And a lot of the effort that she had to go to here was basically to make sure that she didn't get more exposed than she needed to for fire, is to use the Pupniks as tools to clear mines, bait out symbio bombs, bait out weapon attacks to clear the way for her. So Jan is dead, but he has cost enough time, basically. And he's also drawn, at this point, he has effectively drawn, he's killed one Chimera and drawn the other one a long way away from my lines. So it's a fine outcome. It's totally serviceable. If this Chimera down here had been deployed, say, on the roof up here, he would be dead to her right now, rather than this other Chimera who had to run all the way over here. And this Chimera would be well positioned to probably move up and have an absolute go at everything in this building. But that hasn't happened. So my opponent uses most of the rest of his turn to just do some positioning of his own and set up some more defenses. So another crazy koala goes down from the Taskmaster. It reloads off of the Salute. And the team just sort of positions for an attack. They're kind of all in approximately the same locations that they are. And then it passes to my turn, and we have the next example of use of peripherals. So the main thing that I identify in trying to decide what I'm going to do here is the lines of fire of this Riot Girl. She has quite good lines down this corridor of the table, which is why I had to lay all of that smoke in the last turn with my tack whale officer to get the biker forward. But she has much less attractive lines of fire up this line of the board. And with Jan having killed this drone bot, Transductors on, I've got a clear line of attack with the Rassail. Kind of the nice thing about having the 2 Rassails, rather than, say, 1 and a Preceptor, is that I've been able to position them up the 2 main lines of attack, and now that a line is open, I can attack with one of them. Now, I kind of wish this had been the one with the Symbio Bomb, since it's going to be the one that's going to attack, but beggars can't be choosers. So the team basically moves out very aggressively up this line, and then very aggressively up here. The Rassail itself is only 4-4, but the Chaxa is 6-4, so they motor. They get to here in like a few orders, and then are able to start making attacks. So the first thing we do is that there's this bit of cover here. So I move up here, and there's a mine that detonates. No, the mine is down here, but there's a 0 hanging out prone behind some low cover there, and I'm able to basically, as I'm moving up the Rassail, and the Chaxa, I'm able to discover it and then shoot it. And really, he he kind of accepts that he's dead. He doesn't have cover. I've got a light shotgun. And so he lays a mine in response. I kill him with a pair of templates. I take the mine hit and actually spang it. I pass the save, which is great. And I set up for this attack here. So a couple of things we can see. Firstly, we can see this dead zero. There's the mine, and I've just run out here. This is just barely zone of control. Remember that you check your zone of control after every short skill, so you can't measure it while the Chaksa is moving, but you can make measurements over the course of several orders that should give you kind of a reasonable idea, and in any case, getting a good idea of what an 8-inch dodge, 8-inch zone of control looks like is a useful skill for an Infinity player. So, the Chaksa has moved up here. It has stayed in cover the entire way. The Rasail has just stepped out into the open and on top of this because it has a nano screen, so it has that luxury. The Chaksa is threatening basically all of this with its heavy flamethrower, although this Riot Girl in the distance is going to be safe. She's going to be out. The light shotgun, we've measured zone of control, and this is about 7.8 inches. So I have, along this line of movement that the Rasail has moved, I have options for both good contender shots and a good shotgun shot. The downside is, I've only got so many orders. I lost Janstar in the last turn. There's been, just for whatever reason, this has felt, I think the zero took one more order to kill than I wanted to. So this is like, this attack is terminating with maybe 2 orders to actually attack. I think I actually may also have overcounted order spend in my turn. But regardless, this is an example of a peripheral synchronized attack. So my opponent has to decide how to ARO, and in particular if he wants to break the link. If he breaks the link, then this combi rifle Riot Girl can take a shot at the Chaksa. It's in cover, but she does ignore its mimetism. And she could break it out of she could break out of the link as well. Alternatively, if he wants to keep the link fully intact, then he has to declare the same ARO. And if he declares shoot, well, he will wipe this Chaksa out, that's for sure. But he is actually not hugely likely for the Missile Launcher Riot Girl to win the face-to-face roll with this Rasail. If he shoots with the Missile Launcher, he's going to be on 0 range, minus cover, plus link, so 13s. I'll be on 12s, and I'll probably fire the shotgun, actually, hit mode for rolling on. I'll be rolling 15. So it'll be 2 dice 13s to 2 dice 15s. So he's not even particularly likely to win the face-to-face roll. And although he will wipe that Chaksa out, I will have unopposed flamethrower hits on some quite valuable models. Alternatively, if he dodges with everything, he is committing to continue to dodge for multiple turns, multiple orders, because I will keep making this attack, and this Chaksa will in fact just get closer. He makes the call that at the time we've only got, like, I think I've only got a couple of orders to do this. He makes the call to dodge with everything. I think in terms of the defense here, it might have been better to break this Riot Girl out of the link. You've still got 6 cents with everything if you're committing to the dodge with these pieces. But in any case, he dodges with everything. And I mostly just get a little bit unlucky. He makes good dodge rolls. And Riot Girls, actually, to be fair, Riot Girls dodge on 16s. If this was an Orc and Fusilier team, for example, you're fucking dead. You get cleaned the fuck up by this. But it's not. It's Riot Girls. They're heavy. So what happens? The Taskmaster does something like a 19 on his dodge and fails, but his armor spangs the hit. This girl passes the dodge. I land 1 contender hit on this Riot Girl, and she takes 1 wound and guts is prone. And at that point, the Rasail pulls back. I think it actually ends, it moves down to here and occupies this space, and the Chaksa moves in for more of an attack and then moves back so that it ends in cover. And what I'm trying to do there is I move so that I catch everything in the flamethrower template so that it's basically the same thing. I'm attempting to prevent the rearmost Riot Girl from safely breaking out of the team. Oh, also the Rasail, something will have dodged. Yeah, remember that crazy koala, those crazy koalas that were here? Something will have dodged those. I think the Rasail succeeded its dodge against 2 of them in 1 order. Or tanked a hit again. I may have been very lucky with those rolls. Anyway, this ultimately ends up, all of that yellow on the screen, this ultimately ends up being a little inconclusive once the Riot Girl has dropped prone. And the main thing is I'm out of targets to shoot with the Rasail and out of orders. If I have 1 more order, I can vault down onto this and then vault down here, and the Rasail can join in the fight from this position. And at that point, the Chaxa moves up as well, and this is really savage because I'm putting in more and more dangerous hits. It's harder and harder to dodge. I can even start, if he dodges with everything, at that point I start taking pistol shots with the Chaxa. But I'm basically one order short of this attack because, again, this is literally the table edge. They made it all the way up here to launch this attack. That's pretty cool. So this ends up being a bit inconclusive. I think at the close, every Riot Girl ends up with 1 wound on them, but none of them are dead, and the Taskmaster's armor has held everything. And the Rasail is hanging out here. So I haven't materially diminished my opponent's resources, but I've eroded his buffer of safety, basically. So that was kind of a cool turn. And it's also, this is an example of like aggressive use of peripheral teams where they have guns. You could use Fiddler in a pretty similar way. Argada de Assalto is also a great example of a team that can attack in this way, where you have 2 pieces that are both potentially aggressive. You wouldn't do this with a Peacemaker because against the Peacemaker, you would do everything you can to clean the Peacemaker up. And all of these, like, the Rasail, I think, is wounded at this point from the various deployables that it's eaten. But a Peacemaker would be dead to those. So, yeah, the Rasail's 3 wounds really coming in handy here. For the counter-attack, this is where we see the NCO Moira do really good work. She's hanging out back here, and she pops up and around, and she takes a HMG gunfight with the Rasail, wins, does his second last wound to him, so strips the nano screen, and he drops prone. So he's hanging out back here. At this point, the Link team breaks, because if he activates the whole Link team, I will flamethrower them. But the Link team breaks, and this Riot Girl takes a combi rifle shot against the Chaxa. So she's damage 14, BS 13, ignores mimetism. She's a great piece for killing something like a Chaxa, and she kills it. And then the Riot Girl missile launcher stands up and deletes this poor guy. Now, this is not, it reforms the team, stands up. This is not necessarily a great, like, that's a lot of resources to kill my dudes. They took many orders to destroy, but those orders are split across 2 combat groups. And the Moira's NCO really proving useful there. But that's about the most of what my opponent can do. He's losing orders himself, and he's kind of trying to just hold on for the last turn because he has the last turn advantage. And ultimately, that's how the game will kind of end up. In my last turn, I haven't moved a great deal forward. I've moved a few things up, like when that Rasail was attacking, I think I may have wasted or spent an order or 2 moving the tack wheel team in here, which in retrospect, not sure I should have done. But I have to contest zones because this is Frontline. I've done some classifiers, but not a ton. So my last turn is spent basically dumping points into zones. There are some coordinated orders that move baggage Chaxas up. The tack wheel triad moves up kind of into this position. The other Rasail moves up to here into my opponent's zone. My tack wheel lieutenant spends all of those orders that it has because it's +1 order, moving up and around to here and doing the classified that a medium infantry follow-up. It does the HVT and then also sets up to secure the HVT. And I basically, I'm not able, between all of that, I can't really put tons and tons of wounds into things. The Sukwale here does step up and take a broader line of sight, but it doesn't really have line of, the bridges and stuff are in the way, it doesn't really have line of fire to that Riot Girl. The last turn, so my opponent's last turn, turn 3, we actually kind of play out 2 different ways. The first, and it's one of those like, sort of like, if I do this or if I do this. The first thing that we do, or that he does, is try and kill all of my shit. On the logic that my shit is worth points, and if he kills it, I will not have points, and then he will be scoring zones. He's about halfway through an attack run before I remember that I've moved the Sukwale, because the story is closing and we're hurrying up. And he's kind of stuck in the open, and he's taking crossfire, and there are symbio bombs going off, and I've won one more face-to-face roll than I have any right to, and that poor Link team is just hemorrhaging at the seams, trying to push through like the various things I have in place. Even with I'm getting like very lucky. I get very, very lucky where a a riot girl. So the diplomatic delegate has moved all the way up here. Like an end game splits the team, that kind of stuff. Like, that's way luckier than having a right to be because they've got a Timbot -6. So what we actually do is we just pause because I have forgotten that the Sukoil is even there for like multiple orders and it's just silly. And we stop and we're like, hang on a second. You've staged the team, they're kind of sitting here. How do you win the scenario? You win the scenario by having more points in zones. How many points do I have in zones? Well, it's not bad. 2 Chaxes pretty neatly locks down my zone. The Libertos is hanging out here, the Delegate's here. 2 Tack Whales is pretty expensive. The Rassail's kind of expensive. But it's not core heavy infantry link team expensive. It's not Taskmaster, 3 Riot Girls, and Abyssinian expensive. So we kind of stop, and we just look at the points, and we kind of eyeball them. I don't do a count, but we eyeball them. And my opponent eyeballs his, and he does a count of what he has. And he kind of determines that if he just runs up this flank, he can avoid the Sukoil. There is 1 McCall here he has to deal with. So he runs up that flank. The McCall dodges and stands. He breaks the team again. No command tokens left. But that Riot Girl combi at the back splits out once more and kills the McCall. And at that point, he has enough orders left to run everything into either the center zone or the far zone. And he has just enough to control the center zone and control his far zone. I've done more classifieds, but those points put him over the line. So Bakunin gets its revenge. I cannot remember the exact score, but it is a narrow win to Bakunin. Relatively high scoring on both sides. But ultimately, Bakunin holds the central quadrant and their quadrant. And so that's a win. That's a win to our Nomad player. So it's 1-1 between Tohaa and Bakunin. I hope you enjoyed this report. I hope you enjoyed the commentary on use of peripherals. Up next, I'm not 100% sure, but the Loss of Lieutenant challenge for this month is Do Melee, and I've been using that as an impetus to re-examine Yuqing. I've bounced off Yuqing pretty hard in N4. I've not really enjoyed them playing the way that early N4 taught me to play various lists. I've had far too many games where I've ended up with a Sujan on a rooftop on my opponent's half of the table, prone, isolated, immobilized, and targeted. And so I've been trying to kind of relearn them from scratch. And initial games have been really promising, actually. I have one more that I'm heading off to the game store right after this, after I set to upload. So possibly there will be some Yuqing content for the Loss of Lieutenant challenge. Otherwise, as always, much of this video was prompted by a comment from Sanan Atama. Thank you very much for that. It was super interesting. I do read everyone's comments. I'm not always able to do a whole report based on something that someone asks, but please ask anyway. It's really interesting to see what people are interested in, and sometimes something pops up that I can actually do. So your comments are super appreciated. Please, leave comments on this video. Let me know what you thought. Let me know what you're interested in. Let me know if you have any questions, and I will see you for the next one.